Hello! Today's video is going to be my March reading wrap-up. I read 2 books in March. Both of them were part of my Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion book club, where we try to I don't know, it's kind of obvious, right? We try to read more diversely. And so yeah, both of these were picks from that, and one of them I was supposed to finish in February and I didn't, so it's in the March reading wrap-up. I'm gonna get through these books, talk about my currently reading, and then how my reading is going so far this year. Hint, given that I didn't finish any books in February, not so good. Okay, so to start off with, we read Travis Alabanza's None of the Above, Reflections on Life Beyond the Binary. By the way, I love this surname, Alabanza. It makes me feel like I'm like, abracadabra, Alaba. Like, I hope that's not like disrespectful. It's just a really fun last name to say. But so to contextualize this and how we had been reading, because we had sort of a long break in between December and January, like when we were going to do it, our book club, we decided to read 2 books. One of them, let's see if I can pull up the name really quickly. One of them was Elliot Page's Pageboy, and I talked about that in my previous video that I posted. And the other one was Transgender History. It was a transgender history by Susan Stryker. Okay, so we read those 2 books together, and then to kind of move forward, we also wanted to read something by a non-binary, trans non-binary author, and that's how this book came up, and I love it. I have so many thoughts about memoirs, and once I finish my currently reading, I kind of want to do a video specifically unpacking my thoughts about memoirs because it's changed so much. I think just having read several within the last few months, and it was not something I ever really thought about. I was never kind of a memoir reader in my head, much the same way a couple of years ago I would have never been a nonfiction reader. I think this book is very beautiful, and it does 2 things that I love. First of all, it writes not in vignettes, because I think the challenge of writing a memoir in vignettes is if it's not in a linear fashion, then it can get very confusing for the audience because we're jumping around, we're trying to kind of always figure out, hey, what did they say here, what did they say there? I don't have like the best reading memory, you know, I kind of just go with the flow. I don't recall everything. I'm really bad with names. So to me, that can be very challenging on one hand. And also too, I feel like it can be hard to craft a thread throughout. What they have decided to do is to pick sentiments that had sort of been said to them and then reflect on moments in which that statement was relevant throughout their life. So the chapters are named after these things that were said to them. As an example, there is chapter 2, which is called But I Mean Real Trans. Later, children sacrificed to appease trans lobby, which that's such a heart-wrenching chapter. Oh, and then the last one, which I thought was really beautiful and I think really summed up the other point that I want to make about the book, which is this is for us, baby, not for them. And those both, I think, so that that last chapter is something that was said to Travis, and then reflection on, you know, when in life has stuff kind of fallen under that umbrella, or when has that been relevant. And so I think why that's so powerful is because it provides space for Travis to talk about, you know, moments in their life, and to rather than pick out and say one story at one time, to combine them and to say, this is how all of these things fit under this umbrella. This is how I have felt. This is how this particular sentiment has followed me throughout my life. What does it mean what does it mean to say like children are sacrificed for the trans lobby? What does that feel like? How does that sentiment, how is it impacted? How it can be changed? How can it be adjusted to reflect reality? Because children are not being sacrificed for the trans lobby. In fact, it is all of us who are being sacrificed by a system that, you know, refuses to allow for gender expression as we all experience it, right? And so that chapter, there's another chapter, this ain't something we do around, what is it? This Ain't a Thing We Do Around Here, Son, where that chapter is focusing on, you know, ways in which Travis's gender identity and queerness and transness, you know, people saying like that's not something that's done here. And I really think that statement, especially if I remember correctly, like applies to how, you know, Travis is not only trans and non-binary, but also they are Black. And so ways in which their Blackness and their queerness have been treated as though they are at odds, even though they're not. And so I just thought it was a really smart way to say, to rather than focus on this, like this is exactly my life, a way to broaden it to like, this is how these ideas, these feelings that permeate society, how they've affected me throughout my life and how I've seen them affect others around me. And I think that allows for it to kind of, all of that to funnel into the last chapter and the thing that I mentioned, this is for us, baby, not for them, where this book, I think as a person who exists, I feel weird saying this, right? Like I am very neatly fitting into the gender binary, should it, like as it currently exists, right? If asterisks, all the quotation marks to that statement. I don't want that world to exist. I believe in, you know, open gender expression. I think the world is more beautiful and more fun the more people can be themselves. I think that like, why should we make these rules for ourselves when we can live in a world filled with expression? But as someone who is not queer, who is what is it? Oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the word cisgender. Okay, I am cisgender as all get out. However, I think with that, like this book, it is like listening to someone like give a lecture, and you're there supporting your friend, and you're learning so much information, and you're learning how to be a more welcoming friend, but you know that this is really helpful to your friend. Like this is something your friend needs to hear, your friend has to experience and know, and you're just there supporting them. And obviously just is such a silly word to include. It's really important to support people, but that's how it feels, where you know these stories, you know, Travis, they're not trying to educate the cis audience. They're hoping that this will touch the hearts of primarily of their genderqueer family. And I love that about the book. I think it's, you know, I think it's I feel like that is such a challenge, right? So much of literature is focusing on like, how do I appeal to the, you know, the folks who are like more easily like the oppressors, right? Like, you know, disabled folks writing for non-disabled readers, autistic folks writing for allistic readers. And so to me, that is very nice to see a book that's like, yeah, like you'll pick this up, you'll read it, but this is not for you. Or it's like, how do I say this? I know that I'm putting myself in Travis's shoes, right? Where they're writing, I know that cisgender people will read this, but my emotional target audience is my family, my queer family. There. I'm sure that was so obvious and I just over-explained it, but here we go. I think one of the things that the points that really stick out to me is this idea that like Travis kind of reiterates, my transness is defined by the fact that we live in this society that's like very much clinging on to the gender binary. Like in a world where we can express ourselves however we would like, the clothes that I choose to wear, the way that I choose to present my body and my physicality and you know, my voice, my hair, my body hair, there's a world where that won't make me trans, that won't make me gender non-conforming. That will just be a way of self-representing. And so in this way, Travis's transness is socially constructed, and we can, in 100 years, perhaps live in a world where it won't be. Moving on to the next book that I read, it was The Chinese Group by Kathryn Ma. This is a story about a young 19-year-old kid named Shelley who is leaving his like hometown back in China to go study English with his like distantly related cousin in the San Francisco area. And it kind of about like the challenges that he faces trying to kind of make it in the world, how to, you know, like succeed, how to live the American dream, how to provide stuff for his family, how to find love, and yeah, like intercultural interactions. I did not like this book. So much happens where it's like he's walking in and he's like meeting his distant family member, and like this sense of like hospitality and like the Chinese groove being this sort of cultural language that like Shelley is so confident will carry him through every bad situation. And like interacting with this family that has like all of their own trauma, and you know, this weird stuff with his terrible cousin, and this other stuff with like his friend who's developing an app. And I have to say, I think this is like a very feel good, in my opinion. Like it's kind of like a feel good, a story of like, you know, you came to America and you had these experiences, and like it's a very kind of happy-go-lucky story, and there's this like eternal optimism that Shelley as a character has, and I did not like it. I thought that the story like really resolved altogether way too neatly, and it felt like for the level of conflicts that like could have existed, it would I just like weirdly swallowed my own saliva and had to cough. Does that happen to you? It happens to me like more than I would care to admit. But yeah, so there's just like all of these like huge landmines that in anyone's life would be massively disruptive, and yet they are easily and quickly navigated. They move, like every speed bump is moved over so quickly, and you're like, yeah, like maybe it's a speed bump, but it's a very big speed bump and you're on a go-kart. Like that should have done some damage. Like everything goes like so smoothly, and like it's almost like your Shelley is like this kind of central character, and you're like, everyone else is having a much more interesting time than Shelley. Like stuff is happening to Shelley, but it's almost happening around Shelley, whereas like other characters are like really going through it. And I don't know, I found that element of the story just a little bit obnoxious. I found myself rolling my eyes a little bit and wanting the story to go somewhere. I do respect that, like, how do I say this? I respect the fact that this is a story where like a character comes in and has a lot of their mind like really heavily challenged. Like, oh, like this is what I expected America to be, and America's not like that. And like that's cool to get that perspective, and it's nice that it's not like very like trauma focused, and like that's not the story of like that's not everyone's immigration story. So why should that be what happens here? But just how it felt maybe more like YA or like even younger than that. Like it felt like it had the kind of like serendipity that you expect in like, yeah, so it had like the kind of like serendipity, the everything working out in the end that I think a middle schooler would like. And also at the same time, it had the challenges of like a very adult book, you know, so some really serious, I don't want to spoil this book because there's so much that happens that it feels like you really could spoil like every single part, like from the beginning, like all the stuff that the reveals that happen. It's more challenging to avoid spoilers in that way. But I also like, what else was I gonna say? Yeah, and I think that there was a lot of like what I'd call learning that the main character didn't feel like they had to do. Like they learn a little bit, but there's no like sort of, in my mind, there wasn't this like central challenge that didn't get so neatly resolved with very little consequence of the main character. It was like I was in the book club, I was talking about like in Slavic fairy tales, there's this like character of Ivan Durak, or like Ivan the Fool, and the whole point of the character is that he never, like, he doesn't really accomplish stuff exactly on his own. Like the big theme in the fairy tales is you'll see he makes a bunch of he helps a bunch of people out, and those people end up coming back in the story and helping him later. So it's sort of like, you know, you make friends in unexpected places and then they'll come help you. So that's a little bit how I felt with this story, of it's not this character overcoming these things. It is sort of like guy runs around and solves life and bebops around. And yeah, there is some elements of fairy tale-ness to this book, like modern fairy tale, but I don't know, I found it a little unsatisfying. Yeah. I think from this you can see that I clearly had one of these books I preferred and one of these books I did not prefer. Maybe if I was like 13, I would like Chinese Groove, but I am not 13. Alrighty, so with that, let's go into my currently reading. I am currently reading Crying in H-Mart by Michelle Zauner. I had seen this book, of course, I feel like on every single bookstore you enter at some point in the last couple of years, this book has been front and center. It's always sort of been kind of side in the side of my eye. And I never wanted to pick it up. I had really just felt like I don't need to read that one. And then my friend wanted to do a buddy read with this book in particular. And I'm pretty glad she did. This book has been, I'll get into it when I fully review this book, but it has been an immensely personally touching and challenging read at the same time. Yes, I have like 2 chapters left, and then her and I are gonna call tonight and talk about it. By the way, life hack, if there's a Barnes and Nobles near you, there are photos included, and I love a photo, so get the Barnes & Noble edition. Yeah, so hopefully I'll finish that. And then I'm currently listening to Some People Need Killing by Patricia Evangelista on Libby. And I mentioned earlier, or maybe I didn't mention earlier. I did mention earlier. Death Sentence by David Lodge. Yeah, so those are kind of the current books that I'm reading. Ooh, I really hope to finish at least, so I'll finish Crying H-Mart by today for sure, and then I hope to finish Some People Need Killing today or tomorrow, and then maybe I'll be able to get back up. I told myself I would finish 75 books in 2024. I've read 5. That is not a lot of books, and I need to keep going. I need to get back onto it. Yeah, alrighty, well, thank you so much. I hope you have a great day. Let me know any books that you finished in March, if you've read any of these books, what you think of them, and I will see you in my next video. Bye bye!